course, very special. It's all at 26 episodes of Samurai Champloo. It's being presented in conjunction with our new exhibition, Handheld, Gerhard Pulverer's Japanese Illustrated Books, which is on view in the Sackler, and the curator of that exhibition will be along later to give you a little preview of it. I'd like to thank our co-organizers, Otacorp and the DC Anime Club, for helping out as usual, and to thank you for your donations in advance. We have those donation boxes out in the lobby. The entire budget for this program is money that is donated to us from organizations and individuals, and so I hope you'll become one of them before you leave today. I should also remind you that food and drink are not allowed in this auditorium, even though Kushi Food Truck will be along later to serve outside. Please keep your food out there. It's going to be really great, great stuff. What else do we have? We have more speakers today and tomorrow. We also have tours of our Japanese collection, and later on we also have a scavenger hunt map out there so you can find Samurai Champloo related objects in our collection, and I understand there are prizes once you complete that. So I hope you'll hang out for the day and enjoy yourself and come back tomorrow. So kicking things off today, we have Ian Condry. He is Associate Professor of Comparative Media Studies at MIT. He's the author of Soul of Anime, Collaborative Creativity and Japan's Media Success Story, which is on sale in the lobby, and I understand he'll sign them for you, as well as Hip Hop Japan, Rap and the Paths of Cultural Globalization, which is of course very relevant to Samurai Champloo. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ian Condry.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for being here. It's a real honor. It's my first talk here at the Smithsonian, and it's really great to have you here. I just want to talk a little bit today as an introduction to Samurai Champloo. Since you're going to be seeing the show, I won't talk too much about what happens in it. In fact, I'll try not to have any spoilers. But what I want to talk about is thinking about how culture is changing in today's world. We have these terms, globalization, we see what's happening with digital media spreading information around, spreading styles around the world, and it kind of raises the question, what's happening with culture? As Tom mentioned, I'm the author of a couple books. My most recent one is called The Soul of Anime. It is out there, and I'm happy to sign copies later. And I've also written a book about hip-hop in Japan. And so I'm really delighted. As you probably know, Samurai Champloo is an anime that mixes hip-hop elements with ancient samurai, and so I just feel like I had to be here. I have to be part of this wonderful event. If I think about sort of what's the big picture of why we want to understand how culture is changing in the world today, I think in some ways we have to grapple with a rising anxiety, it seems to me, not only in the US and in Japan, but around the world, about whether the directions of our global economy are going in the right way, whether governments in the US, Japan, and other countries are really up to the task of tackling some of the world's great problems that we agree exist. Climate change, global poverty, human rights, conflict, resources, these kinds of things where we know that there are challenges out there in the world. And yet, as we look to our major corporations and we look to our government leaders, it often seems as if we're not getting the kind of leadership we need, and that we are in the grip of a kind of global capitalism that seems to be running out of control. What I want to suggest is that things like hip-hop, things like anime, prove that even if government elites and even if major corporations are not inspired by certain cultural forms, certain ideas, that nevertheless, things like hip-hop, things like anime can go global. And it sort of raises the question, how is that? How is it that something new that does not exist in a place nevertheless manages to spread around the world? How is it that new approaches to media, to media production, to media economies, how is it that new things emerge and take shape and take root? That's really the source of my interest in both hip-hop and anime. And to think about this a little bit in terms of animation, it's useful to remember that animation did not even exist about 100 years ago. That you have, back in 1911, a cartoonist by the name of Winsor McCay. There's actually many origin stories of animation. This is just one of them. But Winsor McCay was a cartoonist for the New York Herald and really wanted to make animation. And so he made a short film that mixes live action and animation to show, to dramatize his initial efforts to turn his hand-drawn cartoons into something that could be filmed and become animated. And as he tells this story in this short film called Little Nemo, he's in a gentleman's club, they're smoking cigars, they're having drinks, And he proposes to his artist friends that in 1 month's time, he will draw 4,000 drawings and make his characters come to life. Now, when his artist friends heard this proposition, this was their reaction. They thought he was crazy, insane. They rubbed his head to see if perhaps his skull was cracked. He said, no, 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 I'm going to do it. And it then dramatizes the immense amount of labor that goes into animation. Stacks and stacks of paper, barrels of ink, and also things are falling down and falling apart. The challenges of making something like animation are dramatized as well. And in a month's time, he did in fact create an animation. I just want to show a short clip of what he came up with. Like the sound? Anticipation. And this is one of the themes of the book, The Soul of Anime, that I just published about a month ago, is that when we think about creativity, when we think about new things being formed, that in many ways what makes the difference is not just the genius of the individual who's working on it, but that a whole community of people like you who care about animation, are what really makes animation a global phenomenon. It's not just the beauty of the works, of which there's many examples, but it's the fact that people get excited about it and share that with others and build up the social energy around media forms that in cases of both hip-hop in Japan and animation around the world have allowed these media forms to take root in places where it never seemed possible, where the people who were told that animation could be a global phenomenon would have laughed in our faces. And yet, the fact that you're here, the fact that anime has gone global, is proof that the elites can be wrong about that. And that in fact there is a possibility for grassroots interactions and remixing of cultures to create things that are eminently new. And this is certainly true in the case of Samurai Champloo. This is, as you can see, it's supposed to be a vinyl record here. It's inspired by interactions between thinking about samurai and thinking about hip-hop. This is the director here, Watanabe Shinichiro, or Shinichiro Watanabe. Watanabe is his family name. And he made series and films like Cowboy Bebop. He's got a wonderful love story in a compilation called Genius Party 1. His particular episode is called Baby Blue. And if you haven't seen Mind Game, probably some of you have, you can see his sensitivity towards music as well. Incidentally, he always wears sunglasses because he has a stalker problem, poor guy. But anyway, that's his thing. And in the case of Samurai Champloo, it's this mixture, right? It's this mixture of contemporary animation with a lot of the artwork of the Edo period. One of the characters is named Jin. Here, this is Jin, which is a word that can mean sort of virtue and loyalty. He stands for a certain style of that. Another of the key characters is a guy named Mugen, who is from the Ryukyu Islands, now known as Okinawa. And so as you'll see, Samurai Champloo is interesting for engaging with a kind of difference within Japan. Certainly the Okinawans are regarded, they have a separate language, and they're often regarded as a separate ethnicity within Japan. And it's quite interesting to say the way, like hip-hop explores race and ethnicity in the US, so too this anime wrestles with that as well. What can we say about hip-hop in Japan as well? And I want to, because maybe hip-hop is less familiar to some people, I just wanted to give a couple examples. One of the issues that comes up in the case of hip-hop in Japan is whether it's more American or whether it's more Japanese. In fact, this is always the question I'm asked. Is there anything truly local about Japanese hip-hop, or is it just an imitation of the West? And I've been wrestling with this for a lot of time, because the answer is basically both. In many ways, the Japanese rappers are learning from hip-hop in the US. They listen to it, they're inspired by it, but they also turn it into their own language and speak to their own audience in ways that might not be recognizable to us. And there's really both ends of the spectrum that happen in Japan, and I just want to play a couple examples that I've made my own fan subs for. And the first is a song called Children's Story. It's a remake of an old Slick Rick song that's been remade many times. And here's Jibara, doing a style of hip-hop that could very well be regarded as very much in the American vein. So let's take a short listen. It's about a minute long. But then there's other examples as well, where Japanese artists have tried to make things that really show what Japan has to offer in a different way. Kohei Japan is another Japanese rapper. He's actually a chef in his off time, and here he's rapping about food in Japan, and what's more local to a place than food itself. You can see how that comes out in this song. Sense of it. And you know what's interesting to me, I'm going to move away from the microphone here a little bit. What's interesting to me is the ways in which it offers a different way of thinking about Japanese identity. That it doesn't have to be either this or that, but in fact being Japanese and being American, it's always about arguing, debating what it is, where we're from, and what we've learned from in order to create something new. And this is certainly true in the case of Japanese rap music that wrestled with this question of language as well. When I first started this research back in the mid-90s, I was told by the elites in record companies, music magazines, that hip-hop would never take root in Japan. And why is that? Because the language is not appropriate to rap music. For those of you studying some Japanese, you know that Japanese language does not have stress accents like English, right? We have the state Ohio. And we say Ohio, it's got stress on the high in the middle of the word. But in Japanese, there's a similar word. Ohio means good morning. And Ohio has a flat, even stress across it. So Japanese rappers had to add in stress accents and make it sound like English, put it into rhyme, so that it could also have that kind of nuance of what rap music is. And yet what's interesting is that as Japanese rappers experimented with adding the rhythm, making rhyming, that there was a transformation that happened. And it's a transformation that one can see in the ways that people wrote about hip-hop in Japan. I used to get all these, used to be free papers before the internet, when you find out about new music and new shows. And there was a great album or a great show, they would write it in English up at the top there. Yo, check it. They would just write it out in English in the Japanese newspapers. After a while, they started saying, yo, check it, using the katakana alphabet there, the second line. Then they realized, hey, you know what? We have a word that is yo. We're going to put that in front. It means necessarily, it's the kanji there in front, yo, cheki, which means you must necessarily check it out. And to me, this is kind of a nice metaphor for what happens when we take culture, objects and cultures from other places, put them in a new context. People often say, well, is Japanese rap music as authentic as American rap music? And to that, it's a complicated answer. I mean, everybody has a different understanding of what counts as authentic. But what is true, certainly, is that people can do things in the Japanese language that we can't do in English. They can take the ideas of rap music and move them into a space that we can't do. I mean, we don't have kanji characters. We don't have these Chinese characters in our language. I mean, a little bit with emoticons and smiley faces, I guess, but it's not quite the same thing. And you can really hear this kind of dynamic mixturing that happens in another song by a woman named Hime. She's written this song called If the Peony Stands. The peony is actually a symbol of samurai, but she is the female peony that's going to beat out the other samurai. And you can hear in this song a sort of interesting dynamic, where in the verse you hear the rap with the rhythm and rhyme, but in the chorus she changes registers. And here she uses an ancient poetic form called waka or tanka. We all wrote haiku in elementary school, so we know haiku. Waka is basically the same thing, except it has 31 syllables. It goes 5, 7. How does it go? 5, 7, 5, 7, 7 are the pulses that make up the tanka, and it's a poetic form that dates from the 8th century. And she uses these old ideas too, like giri, the social obligations that pull in what we're supposed to do, and then ninjo, the human feelings that often draw us away from what those obligations ought to be. So let's take a short listen. Oops. Let's see if that going to work. There we go. And here's the tanka poem in the middle with the 5, 7, 5, 7, 7. And it sort of raises the question, you know, is this the hip-hopification of tanka, or is this the tankification of hip-hop? You know, how are we supposed to understand which way these influences flow? And the answer is they flow both ways. That it both is a bringing out of tanka to the hip-hop audience in Japan, and it's also a way of bringing hip-hop to this tanka world and saying it's still important, it's still successful. So what this means is that we can see the possibilities for incredible kinds of remixing, right? We can understand how the styles of animation, right, the beauty of animation introduces these fantastical worlds, memorable images that still have a powerful influence from children to adults, the sci-fi threads, the more contemporary styles of animation that are going global today. And when I first started studying animation, I started on this journey and I thought, you know, this is great. I want to figure out the success of anime and sell it to corporations, and I'll be a big consultant and I'll get super rich. That was my big plan, and it didn't really work out. And part of the reason it didn't work out is what I learned when I started studying animation is that nobody gets rich making animation. That is one of these things that's an incredible amount of work. It's an incredible amount of labor, and it's very much a hand-drawn process. And so what I did in my research, I'm a cultural anthropologist, so I spend time doing field work among the creators. And so I would spend time in studios like this. And so when there was a new film that I was interested in, I mean, this is the kind of imagery we get in the magazines, on the news, on the websites, big movie posters, the smiling directors and producers. But what I think of when I think of animation are the places where animation is made. Wolf Children itself, I don't know what Zoom is all about, is up on the 3rd floor here, was where they made that film. Just came out last year, Studio Chizu, it's above this convenience store. And this is what an animation film looks like if you're a worker, right? It's stacks and stacks of paper. And it really, it raises issues of how we think about the kind of work that goes into it, the kind of collaborative creativity that really happens. And so that's what my book is about, is starting with these laborers, how they think about what they produce in animation, the way characters and worlds are the core of their creativity, how there is this sort of foreground work. I used to sit in on these script meetings, but then these backstage kind of work as well. This is for a TV series called Red Garden that I got to see being made, and the various, there's about 6 key workers. That was the desk I got to sit in. That was the character designer desks with their fashion magazines. And this was the core group. This is what it looks like to make animation in Japan. And even this transition from the old cell or celluloid forms of making animation to the new digital possibilities, it's a really interesting mix of the handmade and the computerized that goes into it. And one of the things that struck me, you know, to get back to this image of Winsor McKay in the beginning, is that although people don't make money, right? And this is part of the reason major corporations are not so excited about animation. Even though people don't make so much money, they make enough to get by, that nevertheless, there's a kind of energy that flows from being part of a project that's bigger than ourselves. And a kind of excitement that happens when you're in the midst. And it really was struck home to me sitting in a voice recording session for Red Garden, noticing a young actress, an up-and-coming actress who's hoping to break into the scene. She was reading along with her script, and you could see the kind of excitement in her eyes and in her body language as she watched the voice actors and actresses in the studio, the focus of attention on them, imagining herself being in that role. And I know because I was feeling that too. I said, wow, wouldn't it be great? You know, even if I weren't going to make money, if I could be part of this. And it was Red Garden, some of you may know. It's a great little kind of zombie schoolgirl thing with monsters, and it's set in New York City. And there we were sitting in the voice recording studio, and it was towards the end of my field work, and I'd gotten to know the people a little bit. And at one point, the sound director here turns back to the main director and says, oh, we need an extra for this line. You want to do it? And the director says, no, let's get Ian to do it. And before I knew it, there I was, inside the sound recording booth, nervous. You can see I look kind of nervous. I am kind of nervous. I've got the script there. I had no time to prepare. I couldn't work on my lines. But nevertheless, this was my chance, my debut. I think it's important that you see this. And so I'm going to show you. It's, as I said, it's high school girls walking around New York City. One of them is looking for her father. I think you'll be able to tell which character I am. So here it goes. 何？こっちよ、上がって動いてよ。Yep, I'm the sketchy guy in the second floor window. And I hope I'm not typecast for it, but at least that was my mini role. And so what it reminds us, it seems to me, and this gets back to some of the bigger themes too, right? The people say we can't do anything about human rights, we can't do anything about global warming, we can't do anything until we convince the elites out there, we can't do anything until we find a way to make money at it. What I'm here to say is that anime proves that's not true. That's not the only way. That an entirely new industry, an entirely new media form can emerge and in 100 years go from not existing to becoming a multi-billion-dollar business around the world, in spite of it being a tremendous amount of labor. And this is really sort of the theme of my book. I talk about this kind of collaborative creativity, the importance of this social energy that circulates through animation, the way characters and worlds become part of the creative base, the platform on which we build something new. And it shows the way in which these new connections that are happening through the internet, through the digital world, through mobile communications, through processes of globalization, have made the question of whether it's Japanese or whether it's American less important, it seems to me, than whether we are part of solving problems that are bigger than ourselves. If we're part of doing something that could create a new kind of mixture of ideas and practices, people say it can't be done. What's an example where this has happened? The examples actually are all around us. They tend not to make the business pages of the newspaper, just as anime tends not to make the arts pages of the newspaper, but we know it's there. And in some ways, we don't need the elites in the same way, because we can do some of that promotion, some of that circulation on our own. And it seems to me that Samurai Champloo itself is a beautiful example of this, of taking hip-hop, taking animation, and pushing it in a direction that it hasn't gone before. And for me, it's an inspirational example of how, although we may be in the clutches of difficult times, nevertheless, these new kinds of connections offer opportunities that are still to be tapped. And I believe it's people like you who are part of that movement and part of the change that's coming. Thank you very much. We have a couple minutes, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to take the question.
Yeah, we need a quick, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
A quick etymology of Champloo before we see it.
Good idea. Champloo, thank you. I meant to say that. So Champloo is an Okinawan word. It's a word for a food, a kind of stew, a kind of stir fry, where you throw everything together. So Samurai Champloo, Champloo is like this remix idea. And one of the things, if you know some samurai history, you'll notice as you watch this, that it is like hip-hop sampling. As hip-hop will sample an old jazz song or a soul song and sort of jump around eras. So too, the settings, the historical settings here changed. Some parts are around 1600, some parts are around 1850. And so that's the idea of Champloo, is that it's a remix kind of thing. But thank you very much. It's an Okinawan word. Great. Was there one more question over here, please?
Yeah, has Watanabe spoken about his use of Christianity, particularly in Samurai Champloo, and then in the new one, Kids on the Slope? Because it's rare to see, A, Christianity depicted fairly accurately, and B, to see the Catholic Church not come off as some kind of freakish cult anomaly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good point. I don't know his take on Catholicism. I'm more in tune with his understandings of music. But what I would say is that it's certainly the Catholic Church is a big part of the early era of samurai, right? It's this question of weapons coming in, and Spain and Portugal and that kind of trade going on in the late 1500s and early 1600s. It's a really powerful and important theme that runs throughout these old samurai stories. So I guess I'm not so surprised that he's incorporated it. But yeah, it's a really interesting question, and it's true. There's that. There's art remixing. There's questions of gay liberation. I mean, there's really a nice range of things that comes up. And I'm sure you're all excited, as I am, to get to Samurai Champloo. I guess I'll be available probably, so after these first two episodes screen, then I'll be available outside if everybody wants to see the book. I should mention it's also available, the introduction of my book is available for free online at scribd.com, and so you're welcome to just read it there in the spirit of fan subbing, I suppose. So without further ado, thank you all for listening, and please enjoy Samurai Champloo.